Right, I can see people are joining the call, which is great. Welcome, everyone. This is the first day of our annual Festival of Learning. We're really excited about having you here. I'm Lianna, Learning and Comms Manager at London Funders, and I'll be chairing this discussion, which is all about the future of work. Before we get into that, just want to give a bit of scene setting for the festival. This might be the first ever session you've attended, or maybe in the past years you've been to loads, and just want a refresher about what the festival is all about. So this is our annual flagship event, and it is an opportunity for London Funders members to come together to share learning and ideas and be inspired by others in the funding community and in civil society. And we have a really packed programme across this week and the next week. We have sessions categorised under 5 core themes. So they are participation, process, equity, collaboration, and systemic change. So we know that these topics are really live for our members, and we hope to see you at other festival sessions as well. But this session is less focused on how we fund and more about how we can create a working environment that promotes well-being and personal growth, but still allows us to get the job done. We know that people working for funding and charitable organisations have a lot of passion and commitment for the work they do, but sometimes that passion can lead to pressures on people's well-being, and in some cases result in burnout. There was a survey from Pro Bono Economics last year, which found that 3 in 10 charities have seen an increase in staff burnout or exhaustion related to their work. And the same survey also found that charity leaders struggle to recruit and retain staff in the charity sector. So it's really important that as a sector, we get this right and we build a working culture that values flexibility and encourages well-being. And at London Funders, we've been looking at how we put this into practice. And from October last year to March of this year, we ran a trial where we reduced our working hours. And our member at Barking and Dagenham Giving also have gone through a very similar trial. So we wanted to share this learning with others who might be thinking about doing the same thing, but we also wanted to have a broader conversation about the future of work, thinking not just about flexibility, but also how we embed inclusivity and accessibility into our working practices, how we can ensure that employees have the stability and security that they need. So to help us think about those questions, we have a really great panel. So firstly, I'm joined by my colleague, Grace Perry, who is Head of Programme Delivery here at London Funders. And then we have Ugo Ikokwu. Did I pronounce that right, Ugo? You can let me know. Ugo is a London Funders trustee and also a grants manager at Trust for London. Cameron Bray is Head of Learning and Participation at Barking and Dagenham Giving. And last but not least, we have Lianna Etkind, who is the Partnership and Campaigns Manager at the Living Wage Foundation. So we've got a really great panel to help us think about some of these questions. And I think the first thing we want to start with is sort of the why for doing this trial. And Cameron, maybe I can come to you first and just kind of, if you want to give us a bit of context as to sort of why you guys decided to trial reduced working hours. I think you've gone down to 4 days a week. So,
Yeah, so we have been doing a 4-day week since last May. So yeah, it's just been over a year now. How we've implemented it is we just don't work Fridays. So that we have a shared working day. That was settled on because it was our least busy day. So we sort of tested that out and that seems to be working so far. The reasons why we sort of did it, I think there's 2 primary things, which is that one, BD Giving, a lot of the stuff that we talk about in terms of community participation is about trying to create, a different world that sort of looks and where people can behave in different ways and sort of have new systems of interacting. So for us, there was like an intentionality about, you know, there's been lots of talk, especially during the pandemic, about flexibility around work and things like this. If we actually do want to see change happen, we can't just sort of wait around for, you know, and we talk about participation stuff being from the bottom up. It felt a little bit remiss to sort of, you know, expect some top level change, which then would sort of filter down if we had the capacity to like make that change now. And if that helps sort of catalyze things, so, you know, legislation does come later down the line. And then the second bit of it was just in terms of sort of like, you know, the thing that you pointed to around like staff retention and well-being. It was just a way for us to try and explore, you know, what impact did it have on staff well-being and productivity, while sort of being within the means of the charity. So, you know, it was something that we could do, or we could explore anyway, to sort of, yeah, see if that had an impact in terms of like how people in the team were feeling, and see if that sort of led to like a better, you know, better standard of work, and also just into terms of how people brought themselves, because our work is so participatory, it puts a big emotional burden on people. And I think we were just trying to like recognize, like trying to create a space for that for people.
I think that's really interesting, Cameron, and we're going to talk about impact in a little bit. But Grace, perhaps I can come to you. Kind of, I think you sort of were the initial person who was pushing this at London Funders and who kind of really wanted us to adopt this. And yeah, why did we decide to do this?
I think there were a few different reasons. One was kind of the mounting data and evidence that's out there, whether that's from the 4-day week campaign or other organisations, like so much more available reports now showing people had gone through trials, it had worked, they'd stuck with it, they'd seen productivity increase, and like some quite big academic reports had come out as well. So it felt there was just a really good evidence base to lead in on. As Cameron touched on, recruitment and retention as well. I think we all know like the recruitment market's quite tough out there at the moment. So we thought that might help with us as well. I think the CIPD came up with a stat that an estimated 4 million UK employees have changed careers due to a lack of flexibility at work. We knew the government was changing their kind of flexible working requirements to be requested from day one, but that just didn't feel like it went very far or it'd make a huge amount of difference to us. And then it's kind of really part of our other work going on to just be the best employer we can be. And we've done a lot of work around other policies and staff benefits as well, particularly since the pandemic. So we've just been thinking about all of those things quite a lot together. And it just kind of felt, yeah, a 4-day week or other ways of working flexibly just felt like a bit of a no-brainer, like at one point, to why not try and do it?
Brilliant, thanks, Grace. And Ugo, as I mentioned, you're one of our trustees. And when we sort of came with this idea to the board, how did that sit with you? And what was kind of your why for adopting this trial?
I mean, when quite rightly, as Grace said, all of the evidence is there that substantiates the benefits of moving towards this approach. And I kind of prefaced my answer. I was reflecting on this, and you know, there was a statement by Nelson Mandela that I think actually really probably encapsulates this. He said, "When you speak to a man in a language he understands, you speak to his head. When you speak to him in his own language, you speak to his heart." Essentially, really, that's about empathy. It's about cultural awareness. It's about, you know, being able to meet in this context employees where they're at. So I think for us, you know, when personally for me, when this landed, you know, it's a no-brainer. When you look at London as a whole, there is a real lack of quality and flexible work in London. You know, the pandemic quite rightly saw a shift more towards working from home, but there's been little change in terms of job design, you know, that really enables people to have that two-way flexibility in terms of predictable hours, job security, et cetera, et cetera. So I think for us, you know, this felt quite right. And we all work, you know, as trustees, we work in different organizations, and we have different experiences of this. And so there's a real opportunity for us to also learn through this process, and certainly think about what we could take from it to our respective organizations.
Brilliant, thanks, Ugo. And I really love that point about kind of bringing it back to your own organization and seeing, you know, what we can learn from others who are doing this work. And Lianna, my understanding is that you did your dissertation on the 4-day working week. So obviously really curious to kind of hear your thoughts on it, and yeah, why this is an approach for employees to adopt.
I've also had the privilege of working 4 days a week for almost all of my adult life. Initially by accident, because I applied for a job that was only funded for 4 days a week. And then subsequently, because I was bullshit enough then to apply for jobs that were advertised at 5 days a week. And then when I was offered the job, making the case for that to be a 4-day week job, and that I would be just as productive in 4 days than in 5. And then around 10 years ago, I did a master's in community organising, and I wrote my dissertation on the 4-day week and became something of a 4-day week evangelist. I think initially as a feminist, because there is such good evidence that the biggest thing that would enable caring responsibilities to fall equally on men and women, with all of the subsequent benefits to women in the workplace, would be a 4-day week. But also because I think that to have a good life, as Cameron said, to be involved in your community, to nourish deep friendships, to have time to think and to read and to reflect, all these things need time. And when you're working 5 days a week and you get to the weekend and you do your laundry, and then if you're lucky, like have a catch up with a friend, there's just not really the time to have a deeper life. And one thing I also want to highlight is that the Living Wage Foundation grew initially out of a recognition that people wanted to work fewer hours. In 2001, a group called Telco, an organising institution in East London, brought together mosques and churches and schools and other institutions for people to talk about what was putting pressure on them and their families. And the biggest issue that came up was that people were having to work 2 days at 2 jobs because they couldn't make ends meet on one job. And, you know, going to an evening cleaning job would mean that they didn't have time to have supper with their kids. Or, you know, they were on a low wage, they couldn't afford to take the train, they would take the bus, and then they would miss being able to read a bedtime story and put their kids to bed. And that was the beginning of the living wage movement. And, you know, primarily that is about making sure that people have a job that meets the cost of living. We've got over 14,000 living wage employers, including London funders and others in this room, and Trust for London. But actually having a job that covers the essentials of life means that people in low wage jobs, often invisible people that we don't see, like the cleaners, the security guards, the kitchen staff there, sometimes out of sight, out of mind, have the pay rises. That means that they don't have to work 2 jobs. They have time for a life outside of work. And it's not the 4-day week, but it is about time sovereignty. And it's about, you know, having a job that covers the real cost of living means that people have time for the things that matter most in life.
Thank you, Lianna. And I know kind of later on we're going to talk more broadly about work and that really important point around stability and proper pay and kind of security as well is really important. I now want to get to the how, because one thing is, you know, I think a lot of people on this call share, you know, the sort of the why and agree with why this approach might be the right one, but then putting it into practice, I think is another thing. So Grace and Cameron, I'm really curious about kind of how did you put this into practice? I know, Grace, you were leading on this at London Funders, and I did not envy kind of the level of maths calculations that went into working out everyone's annual leave and all that stuff. But yeah, if you can kind of talk us through the sort of how.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step really was getting the trustee buy-in. So it was kind of taking it to the trustees with the evidence and the data we'd talked about and kind of the reasons we wanted to do it and why we felt it was a fit for London funders. And we kind of presented them with kind of doing a 6-month trial, mainly because that had been the standard approach we'd see in other places. It's kind of what the 4-day week campaign had recommended and what we'd seen others do. And also what helped with part of the evidence, our member charity bank were part of that original trial, and then we'd seen Barking and Dagenham Giving were kind of halfway through a trial as well, so that kind of helped our evidence base as well. And then we kind of started with a really big team consultation, just kind of talking it through, the pros and cons, different ways we could do it, kind of what people were feeling about it. And how we might make it work and what the timelines would be and what would be expected of staff, making really clear that the trial wasn't a contractual change, but it was just a trial, and that there would be no changes to anyone's salaries as well during that period. We followed that up with individual consultations, and then during the trial, we had an independent HR company called Roots HR, and they did a report by interviewing each employee at kind of the beginning, the midway, and the end of the trial as well, and kind of wrote independent reports we passed to our trustees. And then we also followed that by monitoring sickness, and we did monthly staff surveys as well. And then kind of through regular one-to-one meetings and management meetings, we were continually checking in as well. We didn't do just the 4-day week. We kind of changed it a little bit. We kind of started with that initial idea, and then we started thinking about the different people in our organisation and kind of a little bit first preempting what they might think about it. Tried to come up with different options. So we presented a few different options on how you could work your hours. So we had kind of the bog standard 4-day week. But we also knew that some people wouldn't want to work longer hours, and longer days wouldn't necessarily work for them. So we looked at doing kind of 9-day fortnights on the reduced hours, no change space. So it's like a day off every other week. Other people looked at doing it slightly different to kind of accrue more annual leave so they can take bigger blocks of time off if that's the way they feel they recuperate more and get that work-life balance. So we were trying to find different approaches that would work for the team. We didn't get them right straight away. They changed for our consultations, and then we stuck with them, and they changed a bit at the end of the trial through final consultations as well. So it was very conversational a lot of the journey, and just being really open with each other as a team and creating a lot of space and time to have those conversations as well. And for us, it was quite important to kind of retain coverage throughout the week as a membership organisation and wanting to stay open 5 days a week. So we kind of had to work through operationally how that would work, people taking different days off, how like people's choices are made, does it work as the organisation? So that took a bit of time to work through as well. We did have some challenges, obviously, nothing goes super easy. We think one of the biggest challenges was finding enough time in everyone's diaries to put the consultations and the meetings in, and making sure we weren't rushing the process as well. And also balancing what we already did, like how our team meetings work, how they would have to change to accommodate people's days, like how we ran our own internal operations and what we kind of had to change and be flexible at as well, and kind of what things we were happy to be flexible about and which things we kind of know we want to keep how we're doing that. So that kind of finding that balance and having everyone's input as well. So that's in a nutshell how we did it, and I'll let Cameron speak.
Thanks, Grace. Yeah, I guess like not too dissimilar. I think Giraud, our chief exec, started floating it in like September 2022, with like me and our other sort of like head of, because we just initially expanded the team. I think we were like 5 at that point, around conversations around like retention and well-being. And then the first step was to get like our trustee approval. We initially had aimed to like launch in January 2023, and then with everything else that was happening, we were like developing what's now like our flagship fund, our growth fund, which launched in January. It just became very, very clear that we sort of got to like late November, that wasn't going to be possible. So as a team, we agreed to push stuff back, because even the you know, we were looking forward to it and anticipating it, but we also recognized that if we didn't do it well, it wouldn't sort of reflect well, and it wouldn't be a thing we could sustain. So we agreed to then spend January to March with a view to having stuff ready to like implement from April. So yeah, it was like towards the end of April that we ended up launching, and so a lot of that time that we spent was around like getting everyone on the same page. Similar, you know, I guess similar to what Grace has said of making clear to everyone that like pay wasn't changing. Our approach in terms of like leave and stuff was we were just testing stuff out because our team was so small. The approach that we took was that we would just sort of review stuff and check in with each other about what felt fair. So initially the approach we had was that essentially you couldn't just take a Thursday and a Monday off and only use 2 days of leave. You know, that Friday would count against your leave, but if you genuinely just need to take a Thursday off because of like a medical appointment or whatever, that wouldn't get counted as two. I think it was just about that managing that relationship, and I think that's what became clear to us, that it wasn't so much that we needed like a perfect system. It was just, how did people feel in the team about, you know, did this feel fair? Did it feel equal? Where we've got to now is you know, a slightly different position around that, and I think it will continue to evolve with the needs of the organization. So I think as long as we've always had that dialogue with each other, yeah. So I think it essentially very similar to Grace, just in terms of we planned out what it looked like. We took it to the trustees. They had feedback. Once they'd signed off on it in principle, we then sort of sat down and started seriously mapping things out in terms of, we want to aim for this date. What do we think needs to be in place by then? What, you know, do we all have a shared understanding? And then, I think that was the most difficult thing, was actually when we sat down and made that decision to say, okay, in 2-3, you know, I can't remember exactly what the timeline was, but sort of coming to that point where we were like, we are ready, so we have to assume now these are our last 2 weeks of full time, of like Monday to Friday working. And I think that felt, really exciting, but also, I think we felt quite nervous as well.
I think also, just to say, I obviously took part in London Funders trial, so not a completely neutral chair of this conversation, but I think that point around kind of consulting with the team and really talking things through certainly felt very positive for us, and it sounds like that was really important for you guys as well, Cameron, and kind of making sure that there is space to talk through the options, but also I think it kind of opened up a broader conversation about how do we work most effectively together. You know, what days do we need to be in the office to actually collaborate with each other and not just everyone sitting on, you know, screens in Zoom meetings. So I think that whole process felt really positive from someone who took part in the trial. And I think I want to ask kind of what the results were from both of the trials, and maybe Grace, we can come to you first, and then Ugo, from your perspective in terms of, as a trustee, there's obviously considerations you had to make to decide whether to make it permanent. So Grace, maybe we come to you first.
Yeah, I think we felt generally quite confident internally that it was working. We'd had a really busy period of work during the trial. We carried ours out from October to March. We had our big autumn conference in November we worked through, as long as other big projects. So it felt we could also back up to our trustees, you know, we're still delivering the same amount of work as well. So that was, we felt quite confident quietly that we could prove it had been a success. And we had our reports back from the independent HR, we had our staff surveys. So in our kind of pre-trial staff survey, we kind of asked people what people's work-life balance, and about 40% of the team said it was kind of fine or all right, and 26% said it was poor before the trial. Since we've finished, 100% of staff said there's an improvement to their work-life balance now. We've had 87% of staff feel their productivity has increased since the start of trial. 87% of staff feel their work-life balance has improved since the start of the trial as well, and 100% of staff feel more motivated in their work. We've also kind of noted anecdotally like how we're working together has created better relationships. So as Milena touched on, we were having our 3rd day in the office, felt a bit you were just coming in because you had to, and sometimes you'd come in and realise no one else was in and you just sat at your desk all day on your own, and nobody wants to be doing that. So we kind of made them more purposeful, and that was through feedback of the staff surveys during that time as well. So we got to implement that as it was coming through, which was really positive. I'll leave it on those stats for now and pass over to you, Go.
Yeah, I would probably phrase our response on the 2 kind of headings. One is sort of the qualitative stuff, one is the quantitative stuff. The qualitative stuff is the stuff that you can't measure. And I speak obviously from a trustee perspective. I think oftentimes there is a tension where trustees are concerned, in that sense of position that you hold is often misunderstood. You know, you feel that the role, so to speak, is for us. It was how do we make this work? How do we balance being a sounding board at the same time? How do we balance the need to observe our fiduciary duties? And I think oftentimes with things like this, that's where the lines get crossed, you know, and you get some organizations where trustees feel it's their responsibility to monitor everything that goes on. It's their responsibility to kind of sit on the management team and dictate, you know, how things, you know, should run. So I think the first thing for us was the qualitative stuff, which is trust. And I have to say this about the London Funders team. I mean, they've grown from a small team. They're still a small team, but the amount of work that they get through is unbelievable. It is one of the best organizations that I personally am involved in. I absolutely love our trustee meetings because of the level of detail and, you know, the papers that we get, the information, the work that you can see practically that's happening. And all of that is built on the platform of trust. And so for us, when this came to our table, yes, we have all the hard evidence, we have all the data, we have all the stats. But the key thing for us is, do we trust James and his team to be able to implement this? Do we trust James and his team to know what's right for the organization? They work with their colleagues day in, day out. They see their colleagues day in, day out, and they are better placed than we are. Our role essentially is to be a sounding board, to sense check maybe some of the things that are coming back. There's obviously the really practical things that, you know, we had to consider. You know, so things like, what would the impact be to sort of staffing? Would this address any current problems? Was this being set up preemptively, or was there a question of risk or burnout or et cetera? What was informing all of this? And then obviously taking into consideration, as Grace said, the evidence from, the Roots HR, and the feedback, more importantly, from staff about what they felt and what they said they wanted, I think was very important for us. And I really want to emphasize on that point around trust, because I think for any organizations that are considering doing this, it has to be done on the basis of trust. I think sometimes there is a danger that when organizations look to implement this, then there is some form of kind of monitoring mechanism that's put in, and people get more worried about, oh, we need to check, okay, people coming in the days they said they would, but if it's done on the basis of trust and you just trust people to understand how they work, then for me it's not a difficult decision. For us, it was about that opportunity to explore what works for staff, this very human approach, which I think is lost across many sectors, and certainly even in the sectors that in the sector that we work in, there is a tendency to want to stick with that which is familiar, but for us is, how do we ensure and how do we support the staff, James, his team, to implement this in a way that works for them. And really that was the underlying kind of consideration for us. I don't know if there's anything additional you want me to add, but yeah, obviously you weren't privy to those conversations, but
yeah,
hopefully you're getting a sense of kind of the conversations that were happening in that boardroom.
Definitely, yeah. As you say, the staff is not part of this conversation, and it's really interesting to hear kind of that was the underlying framing for how you looked at this, and that it was around trust. And I think certainly sort of as a team, when you feel trusted to do your work and you don't feel like that monitoring that you mentioned, it's kind of, it completely transforms the culture. And Cameron, I want to get on to you now and sort of hear what the impact you feel has been on BD Giving, and if you have any reflections around kind of, you know, communications with trustees and how you've managed that process.
Yeah, I mean, Ugo, it's just nice to hear your perspective. I think that's like on the other side of things, that's what we were like hoping for and anticipating in our trustees. I think, you know, not just with this, but, you know, in general, because we took a participatory approach like our grant making and our social investment, we've been trying to get in this space with trustees of sort of, you know, what are your roles? Like, why are you here? Like, what is the thing that you're bringing to BD Giving? But then the flip side of, rather than, you know, trustees being seen as this like roadblock, you know, raising awareness in our team and also in our community of, you know, the trustees are legally responsible for the charity. They have duties they have to carry out. And I think taking the time that we did to like tease out some of those anxieties of like, well, actually, if you're a trustee, you need to know that the 4-day week isn't going to impact on BD Giving being able to deliver its charitable purpose. So, you know, we had put some thought into that beforehand to say, this is what we think the impacts are. This is where we think how we can mitigate some stuff. We think actually stuff might change, but it doesn't necessarily is a bad thing either, in terms of like work practices. So I think, you know, the trustees sort of having that in front of them to show that we had thought stuff through and were trying to do it while, you know, acknowledging their responsibilities around the charity. I think that really helped. In terms of impact, I mean, you know, we used the 4-day week, the report that they did, we sat down as a team and sort of drew out the questions from that. So I think they asked quite a lot of questions and we just didn't feel we had the bandwidth to quite do this. So we drew out the ones that we thought were most useful for our work, and we banded them under well-being and productivity. We saw like across the board about a 10% increase across all the stuff that we were measuring. So these are all self-report surveys that were done on a monthly basis. What was interesting is we did a midpoint review, so at 3 months into our trial, and then obviously at the end of the 6 months. And with both of those, I think it was interesting. What the data sort of allowed us to do was to see where there were any dips. More often than not, it was external factors. So if people's well-being or productivity did sort of take a knock, it was something that had happened. So like for me, on a personal basis, like I had a bereavement very early on into our trial. But I think having that space to sort of carve that out, because, you know, as Ugo was saying as well, the qualitative stuff was actually reflecting on it and having that space to talk amongst the team. Yes, my mood was sort of low and my well-being did take a hit, but the 4-day week was actually one of the factors that enabled me to, you know, to take that time that I needed and to take that space with my friends to you know, get to a point where I, you know, was feeling better and engaging more with the world. So yeah, so it's, you know, with the team being so small, it's hard to make sort of very big claims about our data as well. But I think the fact that we sort of, you know, even that sort of incremental shift, I think it's important for us to note as well that, you know, where we started out from as well, our measures were sort of done out of 5. Our, you know, the baseline score was like 3.4, and by the end it was 3.73. So we were sort of towards the upper end of how people were feeling anyway. So we weren't expecting like a drastic jump as is. And I think that's where the qualitative stuff is sort of really important, because what is that 10% actually capturing for people that you might sort of, you know, numerically try to reduce your well-being to like a 3 or a 4 can feel really difficult. But then, you know, what we expanded on as a team was, you know, people feeling that they had more energy, you know, people talking about specific volunteering opportunities that they took up or studying that they've been able to do, you know, the parents in our team talking about either more time being able to spend with their children or having that time to themselves where they got to sort of do life admin on a Friday while the kids were at school, meant that their entire weekend then was freed up for family activities. And some of those things we weren't actively measuring against. And at the midpoint, we did add in a few more questions that we agreed as a team to try and measure. Like we added a question in about the sort of like the Sunday scaries, and that actually, so, you know, how do people sort of feel coming back into work on a Monday? And I think that stuff like that increased, like people had less anxiety over the weekend and coming back and starting work again. Yeah, and I think there was all these sort of really nice touch points. And like, you know, I have started a master's degree, and like I've been able to do that because of the time that's been made available to me. And yeah, I think all that sort of stuff within the team has been really great. But I think coming back to like how I started, was I think the knock-on effect of like, you know, it's very easy to find yourself in this place of, oh, this thing's not possible. You're just trying to do less work, or you're trying to, you know, well, what about my job? My job can't be done in a 4-day week. And I think actually be able to demonstrate that these things are possible. Yes, they're not perfect, and we're still having to like figure stuff out. But actually, once you sort of get across that block of this isn't possible, we can't do this, and you demonstrate that there are different ways of working the world, that's always been for, you know, we did the same with grant making, we've done the same with social investments, applying that sort of lens of it's very easy for people to find ways to not do things as soon as you're doing it, even if it's not perfect. It makes it easier to have that conversation going forward, to sort of say, well, actually, we are doing a 4-day week. Yeah, there are various criticisms, we've got our own ways that we'd improve it, but it no longer makes sense for someone, you know, 18 months ago saying to us, you can't do a 4-day week, or this isn't possible. That's not a part of the conversation. And I think what that means, you know, for the world we're trying to create, not just locally, but in a wider sense, I think being that example that people can point to, you know, you sort of said it yourselves, in terms of London funders about, you know, coming to us and asking for our data and sharing it, seeing that locally as well, of sort of having smaller organizations sort of be able to see that they can do this. And if BD Giving can make the case to our funders that we can work in this way and we can make it effective, you know, changing the funding landscape and changing the narrative around that of, oh, actually, you're working less, therefore you get less money. It just becomes a sort of, actually, what is the value that funders are placing on work versus if it's just raw hours. You know, I think a really obvious thing is if you work a 40-hour week, a 4-day week for you is 32 hours. But if you work a 7.5-hour week, 4 days for you would be 32 hours. Sorry, 5 days for you would be 32 hours. So it's one of those we would see as a full-time role of someone who's working a 7.5-hour day, but someone who's working that 8-hour, the time that they lose, it's where these categories come from, I think, really forcing that into the conversation. Like full-time, part-time isn't a really, you know, it's not a distinction that sort of exists formally in a lot of places. And I think trying to like nail that down and saying, well, what do you mean by part-time work? Like if I can do all the work that's required of me, that is the value of this work. And I think it's just made it easier for us to have those conversations and to try and shift expectations in the, you know, in the borough as well.
Definitely, I think so many of your points sort of ring true to conversations we've had at London Funders, Cameron.
Can I just come in on one point Cameron made, just about sharing that learning, and we felt that was really important as well. We discussed that at our board and internally and how we'd do that. We didn't just want to be seen to be kind of in our ivory tower doing some really cool thing. We wanted to make sure we really shared that out as well. So we did that through like a series of blogs that we shared out to our members. And we've also been really open to having any conversations with people that kind of want to talk about any logistics we went through. And we're still open to that. So do just drop me an email, put it in the chat if you want to have any kind of follow-up conversations on that.
Yes, that's a very good point, Grace. And those blogs are on the London Funders website. Lianna, I want to come to you quickly. As you mentioned at the beginning, you've kind of been doing 4-day working weeks for a while now. But do these findings kind of resemble your own experience and sort of more broadly around kind of the thinking and the work that you're doing around people's sort of experience of work and their security and stability and all that stuff?
Yes. People often ask me what I do on my Fridays, and one of the speakers talked about life admin, and that really resonates. Sometimes it's not some, exciting outing or doing some beautiful art. It's just having the time and the headspace to get through life admin, and then having a weekend that is a weekend to really spend time with friends and family and feeling refreshed and having the energy on Monday to plunge again into work and give it my all. And on a personal basis, that is really good for me. But I think there are these knock-on effects as well in wider society, and being able to look up and feel part of a wider community locally and get involved in campaigning and social change on a wider level too. And until we as a society move to ways of working that aren't just about your pay job, it's going to be really difficult to have the democracy, the community, the care that we want to move to.
Brilliant, thank you, Lianna. And I can see we have some questions in the chat and in the Q&A box. Kind of some of it is around the logistics of this. So I think we'll answer those first and then kind of get into broader employment policies and lessons from those. So there's one here about whether we still work from home. Do they think working from home days or lack of actually benefits 4-day week rather than harms it? Great. So I don't know if you want to come to that. I mean, we still as a staff team have working from home days. But yeah, I'll let you answer that a bit more.
Yeah, we didn't really change our policy on working from home days during the trial. We've been, since the pandemic, we do 60% of the time in the office. There's a few reasons we've decided and landed on that. One is because we are a membership organisation and we are based in London, and we want a lot of our roles are being out and about meeting members. We hold events at the office, it's a very kind of face-to-face, a lot of it. You can't always just do that working from home, and we want to have those connections with people when we're working through collaborations. We appreciate the benefit of when you need to be face-to-face, but also understanding working from home is really crucial too. So we've kind of kept that 60%. We kind of have a core day the whole team's in, and we try and kind of keep that for internal meetings and have it a day where people aren't just kind of sat at their desks doing emails when they can do that working from home. And then we kind of have each functional team has its own day it comes in. So kind of the operations team, the kind of engagement team and the collaboration team, to have a bit of dedicated time together to kind of build that rapport and what we're working on. And then we have a couple of like collaboration days a month where people will kind of proactively in cross team work. We do work in a fairly matrix way, so just kind of enable that a bit more as well. And there's different preferences within the team. We have some people that come in every day to the office because they just don't like working from home, or they don't have they might be kind of have a flat share and it don't have an appropriate workspace. So and other people who much prefer working at home. We also have a kind of mobile month policy, which I'll come into a bit, so people can like have a month kind of out of the office as well to kind of give that space as well.
And for you, Cameron, do you have sort of, in terms of working from days home and that kind of stuff, how have you managed that?
Yeah, I mean, currently at the moment, I mean, I'm working from home today. So like Tuesdays are work from home day. Partly, yeah, it's a day for us to like put our heads down and do stuff that doesn't necessarily need an office. But you know, in a couple of weeks' time, I've got like a full day of like in the office on those days. I think that's where we sort of got to is, you know, trying to build that flexibility in the team without it, you know, without it being a sort of, you know, you wake up at 8:30 and go, by the way, I'm not coming to the office. It's just about like lines of communication of, I think that's where we're moving to is we think there's a benefit in, you know, sometimes you do just need that space to sit down, away from people, away from distractions. Communication is really important because, you know, we've had, you know, situations that, you know, I think has been shared already of stuff hasn't been communicated and someone ends up being the only person in the office and they've effectively got that feeling, but they weren't expecting that, and they may not have necessarily wanted to come in to the office if they sort of realized that people were either working from home or working, you know, they had full meetings and stuff like that. So yeah, I think we're still figuring that bit out. I think for us, ultimately being like a place-based funder, you know, we can't do entirely remote working. And that's, I'm just touching on, don't mean to jump about, but I saw another question about remote workers. But at the same time, like, you know, I think as Grace said, we do have a similar thing where, especially over summer holidays, if the demands aren't sort of needed, you know, staff members like have done that, and one of our members of staff is doing it currently because of childcare arrangements. You know, I again, it's about this for us, that dialogue within the team, because what happened last summer was with the team being quite small, you know, there was only 2 of us in the office for quite a while. And that felt difficult to the 2 of us in the office as well, because we wanted to sit down and do stuff and work things out. I think that's where it comes. Yeah, I just keep coming back to this. You know, even talking yesterday in the team, you can design systems and you can come up with stuff, but ultimately it's people in these systems, and like we get to design them and put them together. And if you lose sight of that, that's where I think things start to go wrong. If after 6 months you go, oh, actually, everyone taking Fridays off doesn't work. Like, can you test something else out? Can you do something else? If after another 6 months that approach doesn't work, you know, iterate and learn rather than and if it's down to actually people just don't feel good about this, you know, I think going back to like you've got to think about trust as well. Trust in yourself and trust in like the people in your team that you know what is best for you and you know what works. If our Fridays suddenly got, you know, huge demands of our time, we would sit down as a team and say, actually, does it make sense for us to take Fridays off because suddenly there's all this activity in the borough that happens on a Friday that we have to be involved in. You know, so I think just not having that sort of sense of, you know, our commitment is to working fewer hours. That's our underlying mission, not everyone takes Friday off. That's not the core principle here.
Yeah.
I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
And just to echo that, the core principle was really about kind of being, I think the 4-day work campaign called it like their gold standard, which is 32-hour contract with no changes to salary. So that was really at the core of it. And then kind of how we operationally did that is kind of, you know, we decided amongst ourselves and through different parameters, but it was really just keeping that as the core mission of why we were doing it.
Brilliant, thanks, Grace. We have about 10 minutes left. I think we've answered all those practical questions as well. So kind of want to get onto that broader conversation about other things we can do as employers and as funders to really champion kind of a better working culture. And Lianna, you guys have been working on something called the Living Pension Standard, which sounds really interesting and feels also quite relevant to the charity sector, where just from experience, you might not always have the kind of best pension arrangements. Yeah, could you talk us through a bit more around that and what your work's in that area?
Sure. So the Living Wage Foundation has branched out recently to the Living Hours Scheme to provide the security of hours alongside the living wage and the Living Pension Scheme. So to ensure that workers not only can provide for everyday needs now in our working lives, but also when we retire. And it's a voluntary saving target for employers to help people build up a pension pot that will provide the income to meet their everyday needs in retirement. And like the living wage, it's independently calculated based on the real cost of living. So you can either do it as a cash target, so that's an annual savings target of £2,800 a year. It's around 12% of a living wage salary on a full-time basis. And it's been really encouraging since it's been set up to see the number of employers looking at this and taking it on. And it's not something that is introduced overnight. It's been taking time for HR departments or for senior leaders to look through and work out how it fits in with the way their organisation works. But at the moment, there's a real looming pensions crisis. I think lots of people have at the back of their minds that fear that when they do retire, they won't necessarily have the income to support the retirement and the freedom and the options that they want. And it's heartening to see the number of employers stepping up to look to their employees' well-being, not just in the present day, but in retirement as well.
Brilliant, thanks, Lianna. And Grace, we've adopted lots of new policies, including pensions, and the reason for that is to try and kind of put accessibility and being more inclusive into sort of our employment practices. So yeah, just be great to hear a bit more about that, and then Ugo, kind of your reflections on that as well.
Yeah, we've done quite a lot of work over the past few years, particularly kind of spurred on by the pandemic, of how we as employer, and especially as we were growing from kind of, there were 4 of us back then, and now we're just about, approaching nearly 12. So it's been quite a jump to kind of, that recruitment and that retention is really important, as well as just being an exemplary employer for everyone we have. So in terms of policies, we've changed our recruitment policies. We have blind selection process. We send interview questions in advance. We kind of put our job adverts in more diverse places and kind of guarantee feedback to anyone that's been interviewed. We've introduced equal parental pay, which is equal amount of parental leave, no matter how you become a parent, and much better pay than we originally had before. I think it's 100% for 26 weeks now. We've introduced a pregnancy loss policy for anyone who goes through kind of either a miscarriage or an abortion, to give time and space for people to kind of work through that. We have a new pension policy, which we haven't been accredited yet. That's on my list to do that, Lianna, to kind of balance that out and make larger employments from London funders as well. We've introduced a mobile month policy where people can kind of take a month out of the office and work from wherever, as long as it kind of works with time zones. We've currently got one of our team is working in France for the next 4 weeks. We have Christmas closure between Christmas and New Year's, and that's kind of included contractually rather than having to take leave. We kind of have a core hours policy to reflect, not everyone's up with the lark, and some people like to work later in the day and some people earlier. And then we kind of have our staff benefits that we've brought in. So kind of cycle to work scheme, people can buy additional annual leave. We have Benenden Health in place for all our staff from day one. We have life insurance in place, and we offer volunteering days for staff as well. And then we kind of, beyond that, we kind of have commitments we've made kind of to different campaigns and stuff we're a part of. So we are a living wage employer. We back the show the salary for any job adverts we post from ourselves or our members. We're part of the 10,000 interns programme each year, taking an intern in from the Black and Able 10,000 Interns Foundations. We are a disability competent level 1 employer and working towards level 2. We've started doing an annual staff diversity audit as well to share and put in our recruitment packs and be more transparent about our team. We've signed up to the menopause workplace pledge. And we won't ask as part of the recruitment for any non-essential qualifications. Example, like someone needs to have a degree for an office job that doesn't need a degree. So that's some of the things we have in place, and we kind of have future goals we're working to around as well. So the good work standard, having some mental health first aiders, working more with our team and neurodiverse employees as well, and being more working towards the neurodiversity, inclusivity, confidence award as well. I'll stop there because I think that was quite a long list. Sorry.
I mean, I don't know if you can tell, but it's pretty great working at London Funders. Ugo, again, just, yeah, it'd be really interesting to hear your reflections as a trustee. You've obviously had to agree whether to adopt these policies, and you've said yes, and yeah, kind of the thinking process behind that. That would be really interesting.
I mean, for us, from a trustee perspective, I think we've always been impressed, and we were particularly impressed when the team sort of came to us with, you know, and wanted to review all of its policies and introduce quite a number of the policies that Grace has talked about. And I think key to all of that, I'll speak about leadership, because that's something I'm really, really passionate about. And how do we model and demonstrate through behaviors, you know, inclusive leadership? And I think for us, from a trustee perspective, that feels like what is really, really important. You know, it's about demonstrating our commitment to accessibility, to inclusivity, and thinking about how we incorporate all of these values into, you know, the London Funders, its mission, its vision, its values. How do we model those inclusive behaviors? How do we hold ourselves as trustees accountable, hold, you know, the organization accountable for upholding these principles in its daily interactions? And I think, you know, that these are some of the things that we reflect on from a trustee perspective. And as Grace has quite rightly said, you know, reviewing the sort of policies, the procedures, ensuring that they're in alignment with the principles of accessibility, inclusivity, and yeah, I mean, there's not much to add. We take our steer a lot from the team, actually, and when the team have come to us with some of these policies, I see London Funders as leading in a lot of the areas that it is, and it's thinking about, again, how do we take some of this away and think about implementing it within our own organization so that we can have a sector as a whole. This isn't just about one organization, but how do we move the whole sector towards, you know, that inclusivity, that accessibility, and that type of leadership. Yeah.
Thank you, Ugo. And I think that's a really good point to end on. And just to reiterate what Grace was saying, we're very happy to kind of talk to members individually about the trial and other policies. So please do get in touch. Cameron, I can see you raised your hand.
Yeah, I think just slightly jumping off what everyone has said, I think to bring something like the context of the conversation, I think our experience has been, you know, I think there needs to be a shift in how we talk about funding and what tools are at our disposal. You know, I think for me, you know, we're a living wage employer. I think like I see the idea of being like a living wage funder as well. And, you know, I've noted, you know, in some instances, organizations becoming living wage funders, but not increasing the amount of their grants. So it's like, well, where is that money expected to come from? And then I think sort of tied up with that of, you know, policies around like parental leave, which, you know, as Lianna was saying at the very start, I think everything tying back to, you know, shifting society in terms of reducing burden around like childcare on women, like that's only going to happen if funders are prepared to fund like, you know, share like actual, you know, parental leave that is at a decent levels that more people can take advantage of that. Because currently, I mean, on a personal basis, that's the situation I found myself in, of actually having to pick jobs based on, you know, whether or not they offer something which does go above the statutory and goes above and beyond that. And I think as funders, as people who hold on to, you know, hold resources and have power, it's again about not waiting for that top-down thing to sort of say, okay, now you have shared parental leave, now we will make you do it. And actually, do you have scope to implement it now in your funding?
Yes, I think really good point, Cameron. Like you said at the beginning, we can't wait for change to happen. We just kind of got to make a start. And Lianna's done a really good learning blog for the Festival of Learning website about kind of funders' role in tackling low pay. So I've linked to it in the chat. So please do have a read of it. We've got another session starting in 1 minute, so I do have to wrap up this session. But just to say a huge thanks to all of you and to everyone on the call. Yes, please do get in touch if you have any questions. Thank you again.